Hey, let me say this right up front. While you're turning to Matthew 27, if you want to turn there, or you can listen. I won't say this later, but if you don't know about faith, and you don't know about repentance, and you don't know about baptism, then ask us, me or any one of us. We have more to say. We can speak, and we can also point you to some scriptures and hopefully explain it. So don't leave here before you hear us tell you about that. Let's jump right into chapter 27 of Matthew, starting in verse 11. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Who is this man, Pilate or Pontius Pilate? You can read more about him if you want. We do know some things. He was the Roman prefect or governor of Judea, serving under the Emperor Tiberius. McGee says Pilate had a palace in Jerusalem, although his headquarters were in Caesarea on the Mediterranean Sea. So he's in Jerusalem at Passover because in this city it was crowded with Jews, and with the feast, there could arise these riots on these occasions, and they did happen from time to time. Wright's overview is this. He was a minor Roman official a long way from home who was frequently accused by his subjects of heavy-handed or ill-considered judgments, and he got into trouble a time or two with some major mistakes. Maybe you know some of these. He allowed some troops to kill some innocent, unarmed civilians. He used some temple treasury money for secular purposes like an aqueduct. So he ruled Judea for 10 years, AD 26 to 36, and when he was eventually recalled, Wright says, in disgrace, no tears were shed in the Middle East. I like that. So he's the head honcho for Rome in this city, in the holy city, and the Jewish leaders bring Jesus to him because they need his help if they are going to kill Jesus. That's why he's here. Even though Matthew doesn't give us the time to describe the interrogation as maybe the others do, he gets right to the heart of it with Pilate's question to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you?" Interestingly, Jesus allows another to answer the question for himself. He lets Pilate do the speaking. Here's the truth, and so he just says, "You've said it. Yes." The leaders of Israel are throwing accusations to Jesus, and Pilate's amazed. Jesus isn't saying a word. He has no comeback. He's not refuting it. He's not declaring his innocence. He doesn't rebut one of the charges. He says nothing. It appears all along through this whole thing, Jesus is innocent in his eyes. It appears he sees nothing wrong. Pilate may be no friend of Jesus's, but he's no enemy either. I don't think he understands the problem. Why is he here? I mean, he's heard the charges, but really? He doesn't see this man as a rival to Rome. He's not up against Caesar. The empire has nothing to fear in this guy. So all along, if you read the exchange in the other Gospels and Matthew, you see Pilate keeps pointing to his innocence, keeps pushing for his release. And right about now in Matthew's Gospel, he has a card up his sleeve and he wants to play it. He wants to get this whole matter behind them. He longs for a loophole. In football terms, for those of you ready to see some games later, he's throwing a Hail Mary into the end zone, hoping somebody will catch it. He's going to appeal to a custom that had been developed through the years at the celebration of Passover. And Matthew explains it like this. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. And at that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. So as the custom was, it looks like he wants to appease the crowd, maybe push down the rebellious nature and keep the peace. He figures this is a great time to throw it out there and let the crowd decide. So he picks the prisoner, the notorious troublemaker, the criminal in jail, probably ready to rot or be punished next. And surely this man up next to Jesus is going to look horrible. Who do you want to pick? And he's thinking this is the innocent victim of perverted justice, Jesus, not the bona fide bad man. It's interesting, as the custom was, and so Matthew says it in this translation. His name is Jesus. Both men are named Jesus, common name, Jesus. But they may look very much alike. Here's Jesus and here's Jesus. And people say, I can't tell the difference. But it's not the Jesus part, it's the who they are. Barabbas, oh, that's his name. I got it now. They know who he is. And this is the Messiah, so-called. Barabbas is the name that sets them to, oh, we know who that is. He's a man of infamy. He is sitting in prison for good reason, and maybe he's a cult hero, a troublemaker to Rome, and those who wanted to bring trouble to Rome would have loved him. But Pilate gives him the choice, the one called Barabbas or the one called Messiah. Which do you want? And he must believe that Jesus is going to look really good. The Messiah is going to look really good next to this rebel-rousing revolutionary, this intense insurrectionist. Maybe Pilate is appealing to their sense of justice here. I don't know. If they somehow got Jesus, the Messiah, up here by accident, then here's their chance to get him out. But he knows why they're doing it. Matthew just said why they're doing it. Pilate's on to them. There's some selfishness here. There's some envy here. There's a power play, a petty desire to put the man down. It's not justice they're looking for. So will it work? Well, you've probably read the rest, as I have. He doesn't know these leaders. He doesn't know what they're doing while he's asking the question, because they're working the crowd. They're agitating the larger group. We'll come back to them in just a minute, but beyond this, Pilate's got more disturbing things to handle because his wife is going to bother him at work right about now. He's trying to do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and she's got some news that he's got to hear. Verse 19. Pilate's sitting on the judgment seat, and his wife sent him this message: don't have anything to do with this innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. So he, the representative of Rome, the sitting on the judgment seat of justice, making things right and squashing evil, he is trying to do his job while his wife phones in. By the way, I have something I got to tell you. Romans were thought of as being very superstitious. They wanted to appease all of the gods. They wanted to make sure they were good on every front. So when the dream comes through, she doesn't see it as just some bad guacamole I had last night. She's thinking this is a sign from the gods. This must be a warning to take this seriously. So we don't know the dream. She doesn't give any details, and neither does Matthew. And we're I think, wondering from where we sit, what was God doing in all of this? She doesn't even have a nightmare, so it seems, because it's bothering her in the daytime. So either she's dreaming during the day, or what happened at night has followed her and is choking her. She's wrestling. She's bothered by it. Her words, she's suffering. Her conclusion is, whether it was said in the dream or she concludes it is, that man that you are dealing with is innocent. Have nothing to do with him. Step back. There's trouble there. And her husband, if he already didn't have a little heartburn over the miscarriage of justice that the Jews have brought him, is now probably even more bothered by his wife's being bothered by this. Pilate may think it's an easy thing, just let him go. I'll let him go. Just trust me, I'm going to let him go. But he has no idea what he's up against with the Jews. The chief priests, verse 20, and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. Which of the two do you want me to release to you? Asked the governor. And they were ready. Barabbas, they answered. Well, what shall I do with Jesus then, the one who is called the Messiah? And they all answered, crucify him. But why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. And they all shouted all the louder, crucify him. The leaders really are working hard, working overtime to get their way. They are going to see Jesus die. And as Pilate is fighting to free him, they are counterpunching, working to kill him. They're working the crowd, stirring the enthusiasm, inciting the bloodthirsty, violent spirit within him. And he asks, which one? They already have their answer. This Jesus or this Jesus? Barabbas or the one they call the Messiah? Barabbas, let him go, they say. Set him free. We want him. Barclay says the crowd chose the violent criminal and rejected the gentle Christ. They preferred the man of violence to the man of love. Makes you wonder what the crowd is thinking deep down. We know what they're saying, but what are they feeling? Is the idea of Barabbas being free the one they love, or they just hate Jesus? Or really is it more they're shouting with everyone else who is shouting for some reason? Doesn't matter, the outcome's the same. What do I do with Jesus, he asks. With one voice, clearly and resolutely, crucify him. Crucify him. I think Pilate has been surprised this whole day already. I think he's really surprised now. Crucify him. He must be thinking, crucify. It's a little much, don't you think? It's overkill, isn't it? Why, he asks. Good question. Why? What crime has he committed? And he knows their accusations, but it's not making sense. Robertson calls this a feeble protest by a flickering conscience. He knows what they're saying, but that doesn't seem right. If this is a king, Pilate says, he's thinking, where's his kingdom? If he's an insurrectionist, he's not doing his job very well. If he's a criminal, then let the crime fit the time. This doesn't require crucifixion. I think Pilate may be bothered by it like his wife is, but they are out for blood. They're not prepared to make an explanation, to make an argument, to defend their position. They're just feeling it. And you can ask any lynch mob what they're feeling, and the answer is going to be the same. Anger and rage. We want blood. Logic and rational thinking and legal necessity and moral accountability, they're out the window. It doesn't matter. No, thank you. None for us. We've got enough. No answer will answer the question he just asked, so they shout all the louder, just kill him already. Crucify him. I think Pilate's confused by the Jews. He never liked them from what we know from history. I would think his disdain for them is growing in this moment. He doesn't understand them, and more importantly, he doesn't understand the God who is behind all of this. Pilate just knows he's between a rock and a hard place, a precarious predicament. He's in trouble with the Jews, has been before, and he's in it again, and they're going to be his undoing in the end, if you know the rest of his story. Erdman says he's compelled to disregard his conscience and to obey the subject Jews whom he despises. And I think he's acting now just to keep the peace. More than that, maybe just to keep his job, just to keep his head. If this is turning into a mob rule mentality of a rebellion that's blowing up in his face, then he's got to nip it in the bud. He's about to stop it where it starts. The people have him over a barrel, and he knows it. He and his wife agree he's innocent, but he can't afford to do that right now. He's got to save himself, not Jesus. Somebody's going to die. It won't be him, not today. So, verse 24, when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It's your responsibility. And all the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. And then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. I think Pilate did his best to get Jesus out of there, but he couldn't do it. So he does what is wrong personally in his heart, but does what is right politically for his position. In some ways, you could say he and Peter did the same thing. Both throw the victim to the wolves, and they save their own skin. The only way Pilate can justify all of this, the poor man, the innocent man, the victim here, is to say, I have nothing to do with this, like his wife said. So he steps back, really grabs the water in symbolic fashion, washes it before the people and says, see, it's not my fault now. I have nothing to do with this. It's your responsibility. And I think it's sad when you watch a leader of the people roll over like this. It happened back then. It happens today. Politically, people do this a lot, I think. Instead of doing what is right, they do what is easy and expedient. They say they're working for the greater good and for the bigger cause, but as it turns out, it always happens to be them they're working for. So they keep a really good eye on their own pocketbook and their own popularity and their own political future, and so they do whatever they need to. And it's sad when an innocent person like this gets killed in the process, but hey, what can I do here? What can I do? My hands are tied. So he says, maybe in a way of speaking in our language, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? Do you wonder if Pilate is a decent guy who's trying to do right and they just keep thwarting his efforts? Or is he a spineless political leader bending over to get his job done so he can keep his job? He's hoping this water on his hands gets him out of hot water, desperately hoping the washing that they see is going on the inside. But he's going to have a really hard time relieving his responsibility in God's eyes. Pilate quickly gives up the responsibility, and the people take it on. Yeah, give it to us. Put it on our shoulders. Let his blood be on us and our children, they say. And as willing as they are, how can they know what they're really saying? Can they understand the significance of the moment? Do they know what they mean by what they say? I think they have no idea how wrong they are at the same moment, how right they are, because they will own it. And they're proud of it, sadly. They can't even comprehend the weight of it, the responsibility they are taking on, killing the Son of God. But in that moment, Barabbas walks out and Jesus walks on to be killed. And we'll pick it up there next week. But this whole week, as I've been talking about this, thinking about this, reading about this, studying about this, I can't get away from Barabbas. We know the rest of the story of Jesus. We'll keep talking about Jesus. But Barabbas just kind of steps out of that situation and into nowhere. He leaves history. We don't know what happened to him, but don't you wonder what happened to him? He walks out of jail. He walks out of that place a free man, and another takes his place and dies. You ever thought about Barabbas? We know the rest of Jesus' story, but what happens to him? Don't you wonder if he followed the story, the rest of Jesus' story? Even though he's free, did he turn back and look? Did he watch as they start whipping, flogging, scourging Jesus? Did he watch any of the scene as he is beginning the torture? Does he walk with him, behind him, as he struggles with his own cross through the streets and up the hill? Does he watch the nails go into his skin? Does he see the thorns pressed into his head? Does he watch the blood come out? Does he watch his last breath? Does Barabbas even know that he died in his place? Did he ever change his ways? Did, as some people think, he becomes a Christian? There's no evidence of that. Or did he go on with his life from that moment on, the same man he always has been, totally unchanged by that moment, by what Jesus did? Do your own study of Barabbas. See what tradition says. See what some churches teach. We don't know. But I keep coming back to Barabbas. In some ways, I think we are Barabbas, aren't we? Someone took our place on that day. We were the guilty ones. We were the criminals. We were the sinners. And we deserve to die for it. But one man steps in out of nowhere, a man we know nothing about in some ways. And before we even understand the story, he will die for us. He, the innocent one, would die while we, the guilty one, walk free. And here we are today, still today, talking about it. But I wonder, do we understand it? Do you think it hit home for Barabbas? Do you think he understood the weight of that moment, or was that a moment as useless to him as this sermon is to some who will hear it and never really take it in? The good news of salvation, the offer of forgiveness, the life, the freedom, the eternity can be for some garbled syllables like a baby speaks, an annoying humming of something in the ear, a drum beat that is deafening but means nothing and changes nothing. It would be nice to think for Barabbas that he changed his life and from that moment on followed Jesus Christ, and we will see him one day in heaven. But it's possible it was lost on Barabbas and nothing happened after this moment that changed anything. There are moments in history that change us, some moments in our lives that shake us and wake us up, that say, I could have died and that could have been me. Like what CNN reported back in 2011 about this day today, September 11th, 2001. If you were alive, you cannot forget that day. And some were changed by it, by what happened as we were. Others were changed by it in a profound way because they lived it. Like Elise O'Kane, flight attendant on United Airlines. Turns out she wanted to be on Flight 175 that morning, but couldn't get on it. On her schedule to be a flight attendant on that plane, which was her goal, she didn't do the keys right on her keyboard, and turned out she didn't get on the flight. So she got on there later and missed the deadline, she said, I think by a minute. So that morning she shows up at the airport. She knows where she's going, Denver, not LA, and she happened to meet the man. His name is Robert Fangman, and he was on that flight. And he was giddy. He was excited because he got to go to LA, and she was a little bit jealous that she didn't get to. Until later that morning, she found out that is the one that struck the tower, the South Tower, and how many died, and could have been her. He took her place on that plane. It could have been her. So she asked what many survivors ask, why me? And out of all the wonderful people, why me? And what have I done? I'm no saint, she said. I'm no angel. Why me? And friends tried to encourage her, she said, with some words like, God has a plan for you and you were meant to be here. But she didn't think those words were very helpful. In fact, they hurt. But she got on with life. She made a career changed. Always remembering that day. You could say Elise O'Kane would never be the same again, of course. At this moment, Jesus is walking out to die, and it seems very random that at the same time a Barabbas is walking free. Turns out it's not random at all. All of this was as God planned it. Someone had to die so someone else could go free, and it's not random at all that, as it turns out, this is our story too. Here we are, Barabbas. We are free today because Jesus has died in our place. If the people wanted a sinner who was already condemned to be punished, there was Barabbas. If Rome wanted to kill him, for being an insurrectionist and a murderer and a trouble causer, then they didn't have to think hard. They loved killing people at times. They could have killed him, Barabbas. If the whole world wanted to see him suffer and would have said, yes, he's a bad guy, and if later on he was the one hanging on a cross, like maybe two of his cohorts were, I don't know, then it's no big deal, right? Justice is done. So be it. Let him hang. Let him die. But no. On that day, Barabbas walks out, and a man who did not deserve to die would die in his place. And we say this morning, sitting in this comfortable place, that's not right, that's not fair, that's not justice. The innocent and righteous one dies for the criminal, good-for-nothing sinner? Yes, Barabbas walks the streets, enjoying his day, while Jesus, the innocent Son of God, dies. And it's not right, but it is the story of the gospel. In what universe should that happen? Only in God's world can that happen. Crazy, but true. Unfair, but necessary. Almost unbelievable, but it's the story of grace. It's the story of salvation. It's the only reason we have hope today, that the innocent one would die for the guilty. Paul says he was delivered over to death for our sins and was raised to life for our justification, Romans 4. So I think today you are looking at Barabbas, and I am looking at a room full of Barabbases. Whether or not you understand it, I don't know. But I think this morning you've got to answer these questions. Are you grateful for it? Do you really understand it? And will you live changed by it? Answer that for yourself. Let's stand and sing this song.
Through Canaan's land,